Why, hello there, friends. It's Emma here, the Bookish Princess. I'm coming to you today with a good old-fashioned April reading wrap-up. I feel like it's been a little while since we sat down and had a bookish chat, and I have quite a number of lovely books to fill you in on. So go get yourself a calming beverage, some coffee or tea, and let's get to it. I've been rereading the wonderful Little House on the Prairie series by Laura Ingalls Wilder this year, and I did continue on with it. I finished On the Banks of Plum Creek and By the Shores of Silver Lake. I know I've mentioned this before, but I think the thing that's standing out most to me on this reread is just the resilience of Laura and her family. They just take all these difficulties in their stride, and obviously it's tough and it's not fun sometimes, but the way they face them and the way they stick together, the way they keep moving forward, and the way they still continue to find beauty in all the small things around them is just so wonderful. I'll give a spoiler warning for On the Banks of Plum Creek. Spoilers ahead. But one of the big events in this book is that there is basically a grasshopper blight. I mean, it's almost a biblical kind of plague. In fact, they do read about the biblical plague and kind of find comfort. They understand that scene in the Bible because the grasshoppers come and they just eat everything. This whole beautiful crop of wheat that Pa has been, putting his hopes on, and you see hints of it, that it's coming, when they first moved to Plum Creek, long before the grasshoppers actually arrive. So when I was starting to reread it, I was like, oh my gosh, that's right. This is the one with the grasshoppers. And it is so heart-wrenching to think of how hopeful they are. And Pa says, oh, we'll be rich once I harvest this wheat. Or, we'll pay for this, we'll do that once I harvest this wheat. And the grasshoppers are gonna come along and eat all the wheat. But in spite of that, you'd think that would blight the whole book or blight Laura's memories of this time, but it doesn't at all. There are still so many beautiful vignettes and fun scenes. There's a town party, there's a country party, there's a beautiful Christmas celebration. They are closer to a town, so the little girls get to go to school and church for the first time, and they love the creek and all the life along it and the horses. There's just still so much joy in spite of the grasshoppers. And I just thought that was so encouraging. In fact, the end here, hold on. The end of this is just so beautiful and just expresses Laura's contentment with her life in spite of all the difficulties. The wind was screaming fiercer and louder outside. Snow whirled swishing against the windows. But Pa's fiddle sang in the warm lamp-lighted house. The dishes made small clinking sounds as Mary set the table. Carrie rocked herself in the rocking chair, and Ma went gently between the table and the stove. In the middle of the table, she set a milk pan full of beautiful brown baked beans, and now from the oven she took the square baking pan full of golden cornbread. The rich brown smell and the sweet golden smell curled deliciously together in the air. Pa's fiddle laughed and sang. Laura patted Jack's very smooth forehead and scratched his ears for him, and then with both hands she gave his head a quick, happy squeeze. Everything was so good. Grasshoppers were gone, and next year Pa could harvest the wheat. Tomorrow was Christmas, with oyster stew for dinner. There would be no presents and no candy, but Laura could not think of anything she wanted, and she was so glad that the Christmas candy had helped to bring Pa safe home again. Supper is ready, Ma said in her gentle voice. Pa laid the fiddle in its box. He stood up and looked around at them all. His blue eyes shone at them. Look, Caroline, he said, how Laura's eyes are shining. Isn't that just lovely? And then By the Shores of Silver Lake, in this one, Laura is growing up more and is really taking on more responsibility. So there is kind of more of a soberness just of becoming an adult and, having more on her shoulders. One of the things, which now I'll give a spoiler warning for By the Shores of Silver Lake, but in between the books, Mary goes blind. She gets, I think it's scarlet fever, and loses her eyesight. But Pa tells Laura that she needs to be Mary's eyes and ears. So when they move out west again, Laura describes everything she sees. And I was thinking how, I bet that was really great kind of early training for Laura Ingalls Wilder as a writer, and to help her remember all of these vivid scenes out west that she was witnessing. And then we get to listen in on those descriptions that she gave to Mary. And again, there's difficulties and hardships, but such a beautiful spirit of resilience and just an appreciation of life. Just when Laura's getting up early at sunrise to go out and move the cow to fresh pasture, she just has so much joy in the beautiful sunrise on the prairie, and I just absolutely love that about this series. Another series that I continued with this month was All of a Kind Family. I read more all-of-a-kind family. I think that similar to Laura Ingalls Wilder writing about her own experiences, this is semi-autobiographical. Sidney Taylor is the author. She was born and grew up on New York City's Lower East Side right before and during World War I, and that is exactly when this takes place. You have the wonderful family of 5 girls and 1 little boy. There was a fun May Day celebration. You can probably see the maypole there on the front. Yeah, this is so fun to hear about the American customs that they're adopting, but also their Jewish traditions and the illustrations. What's the illustrator's name again? Mary Stevens. The illustrations just make this book. They are so adorable. I absolutely love them. They just bring the story to life in such a beautiful way. So this one is a very recent read. I only just finished it here at the beginning of May, but I remembered on April 30th that back in the fall I had purchased The Enchanted April by Elizabeth von Arnim, meaning to read it in April, so I was a little annoyed that I didn't get to it sooner. But this is April in Italy, so really it's like, you know, May or even June, the weather that they're experiencing. In fact, there's a beautiful description, many beautiful descriptions of the flowers and how it's like the best of spring and summer. The flowers that you get over 6 months in a more colder climate, you get just all together in April in Italy. I think I'd seen the movie of this a long time ago, but I didn't remember it very well. This book absolutely makes you want to escape to Italy in April. It starts actually, I think, in February, and there's an ad in the paper that says, "To those who appreciate wisteria and sunshine, small medieval Italian castle on the shores of the Mediterranean to be let. Furnished for the month of April, necessary servants remain." 2 women who are kind of going through the motions, like living life on autopilot and haven't had a break in a long time. Pretty much strangers, only know each other by sight, but they both are looking at this ad and they end up, of course, engaging the castle. They find some other women to share the rent with them. So it's these 4 strangers basically heading to San Salvador. It seems to have a sort of magical effect, especially on Lottie. She's really the main character. She was sort of the instigator who made the whole trip happen. She says that it's like heaven. They've arrived in heaven. And the story is told in such an interesting way because it is quite heavenly, and there is a sort of magical effect that the castle and the vacation seems to have. The sweet smells that were everywhere in San Salvatore were alone enough to produce concord. They came into the sitting room from the flowers on the battlements and met the ones from the flowers inside the room, and almost thought Mrs. Wilkins could be seen greeting each other with a holy kiss. Who could be angry in the middle of such gentlenesses? Who could be acquisitive, selfish, in the old rasped London way in the presence of this bounteous beauty? And yet, people are still incredibly selfish. We hear all about their selfishness, and their intentions often are pretty much all wrong, and yet things turn out right. I did enjoy it. I did think she really captured the spirit of just being on holiday, being away from all of your everyday, ordinary, you know, routines, and, you know, just having a vacation and like having some time and space to think things out. There was one part where Lady Caroline said she was going to really think about things and come to a definite conclusion. And sometimes I feel that way when I'm on a trip too. I'm like, I'm gonna think out this problem and like, I'm gonna come to a conclusion about it. And I usually don't really, but it is refreshing just to, you know, be away from the everyday and just to, you know, kind of get a new perspective. In some ways though, this time to think is not welcome to some of the characters, including Lady Caroline. She pulled her wrap closer around her with a gesture of defense, of keeping out and off. She didn't want to grow sentimental. Difficult not to here. The marvelous night stole in through all one's chinks and brought in with it, whether one wanted them or not, enormous feelings. Feelings one couldn't manage, great things about death and time and waste, glorious and devastating things, magnificent and bleak, at once rapture and terror, and immense heart-cleaving longing. She felt small and dreadfully alone. She felt uncovered and defenseless. Instinctively, she pulled her wrap closer. With this thing of chiffon, she tried to protect herself from the eternities. There's some great writing and some humor. Yeah, overall, I enjoyed it. I guess the one thing that really kind of spoiled my complete enjoyment of it was her attitude towards Rose and Frederick, 2 of the characters. They're a married couple who has become estranged, and it's partly because of Rose's principles. And in fact, at one point she says something about how Rose had measured up her husband against her sense of right and found him lacking. And Rose's husband doesn't take her principles seriously and just ignores them and, you know, completely ignores them basically. It's like, they're boring, don't trouble me with those, I'm just going to go my own way and not not care about your sense of right. And the author takes the same exact attitude. She seems to think that these principles aren't important and that Rose has just been kind of ruining her own happiness. And I guess I would not agree with that at all. I think Frederick sounds pretty awful to not actually take his wife's opinion and her sense of right and her, you know, principles seriously. And I guess really that's something that Rose should have thought of before she married him. She should have figured out what her own principles were and had a conversation to make sure that her future spouse was on the same page and that he would take her principles seriously, which is probably not at all the conclusion that Elizabeth von Arnim thought wanted you to come away with. I have read Elizabeth and Her German Garden. That's quite a slim book, and I did enjoy that one. I do love Elizabeth's appreciation of beauty and her subtle sense of humor, and she is a good writer, and it was definitely a fun thing to read in the springtime. Definitely makes me want to go to Italy. So I had quite a number of ebooks that I read that I really enjoyed. I read A Company of Swans by Eva Ibbotson. This is one of Eva Ibbotson's adult novels. We start off in Cambridge. There is a ballet company. There is the lush landscape of South America. I do always love Eva Ibbotson's characters. They're so warm, so well drawn. There are always so many interesting and funny lines. Harriet, the main character, is reading one of Emily Dickinson's poems. She stood for a long time looking at the verses in which Emily Dickinson had chronicled her heartbreak. Loneliness had taught Harriet that there was always someone who understood. It was just that so very often they were dead and in a book. I can definitely relate to that. Oh, here's another great one. This character in this situation isn't doing anything to stand up for himself. And they're saying, well, why? It was pride, of course, the fierce pride of the gifted and strong who will take nothing from anyone. Perhaps also the knowledge that if Henry had practiced any kind of fraud, the mills of God would grind him more surely than Rom could hope to do. Isn't that sort of stunning? Like, the next time I'm feeling aggrieved or, you know, put down or affronted, I should think of that. That, like, anyone who is practicing fraud on you or who is, you know, really doing something wrong, like, the mills of God will grind them more than you can hope to do. Here's another great one. She poured herself another cup of coffee and contemplated with gloom the bizarre events on which Tchaikovsky had wasted some of his loveliest music. I feel like I've noticed this in some of Eva Ibbotson's other works. She does have this beautiful appreciation of music. She obviously is familiar with like the performance world, the ballet world. The only caveat that I have, unfortunately, the sort of moral sensibilities of some of her characters are a bit European. I think that's how she herself describes it. I'm not quite on the same page with her there, but I do really enjoy her novels. And then I also read The Green Empress by Elizabeth Cadell. This was such a fun scenario for a book. The Green Empress is the name of this beautiful gleaming green tour bus, and it is for the extremely wealthy. I don't know if anything like this ever actually existed. I need to Google this, but the idea is that extremely wealthy people who are traveling from one place to another, if they want to do it sort of more leisurely and turn it into a little bit of a vacation, maybe they have to fly from London to Madrid, but they can take this, the Green Empress, the tour bus, and it takes a little bit longer than, like, say, flying, but it's a little bit of a vacation, and like all of the stops along the way are incredibly beautiful. Every last wish and whim is catered to. The food is all amazing. There is like a sort of tour guide, but like they don't want to call him a tour guide or a courier, but basically somebody who sees to their comfort but also could give them information about the places they're visiting if they're interested in learning more. And the story centers on a young man who has taken the job of courier slash tour guide just as sort of an interim. He's about to go out to Canada. He was invalided out of the Navy, and he's kind of tried to cut off all of his old associations because, you know, due to his injury, he can no longer be in the same line of work, and it's been a very bitter pill to swallow. And then on the bus, there are some people from his old life he runs into. There's really a fascinating cast of characters on the bus, and there is a mystery that unfolds. Elizabeth Cadell often has a mystery, and this one was quite good. I could see what things were involved, but I could not add up the pieces. She did surprise me with the end. That sense of suspense definitely keeps you reading. And there's also some romance, and of course the beautiful scenery of Europe that they're passing through. The main character is quite knowledgeable about history, but the guests on the Green Empress aren't really interested in it. It made me want to know more about the route Constantine took through Europe, or Hannibal, or, you know, the Roman troops. I also read Susan Settles Down by Molly Clavering. I've read, I think it was called Near Neighbors, and that is set in Scotland, and it's about like neighboring, the neighbors of two houses who gradually get to know each other, and that is really charming. I enjoyed that a lot. This takes place also in Scotland, but kind of out, you know, out in the countryside, and there were moments when I was thinking, oh yes, I really enjoy this. This is like so cozy and so evocative and makes you feel like you're here at this Scottish castle in this little neighborhood. But then there were other moments where it just dragged. I think it needed an editor. There were certain scenes that just seemed totally irrelevant. You weren't sure why they were there. And there were also, bizarrely, these long passages of like sort of slapstick humor, like these long, elaborate jokes that the characters were like trying to play on each other. And like then, oh, they laughed so loud. And I think she was thinking you would laugh too, but it didn't come off as that funny. And in some cases, the characters were sort of behaving out of character in order to perpetuate the joke. So someone should have advised her to like, you don't need that humor. You can just cut that out. It just distracts. So I'm gonna have to try another Molly Clavering, because I did like Near Neighbors quite a lot better. Molly Clavering was a neighbor of, and I think friend of, D.E. Stevenson, and I did read a D.E. Stevenson this month. She's one of my favorite authors. I just absolutely adore her. She wrote Miss Bunkle's book, the Mrs. Tim series. This book, Charlotte Fairlie, also took place in Scotland, and it did take us up to the Highlands to a remote Scottish lake, which was wonderful. But the main character is the headmistress of a school, and she herself is a little bit lonely, but she certainly has her hands full in the school, and D.E. Stevenson just writes so beautifully, and she always has so many interesting little asides. Charlotte knew that it was awfully easy to say too much and to dim the clear gem of wisdom with a cloud of words. Isn't that great? It reminds me of like King Lear, who's like, words, words, words. It's true. Sometimes, like, there are just too many words and they mean nothing. Oh, I loved this description of a village. It was not like an ordinary village with houses in a straight row. Each house seemed to have found its own place and settled down comfortably. It reminded Charlotte of a group of people who settled down to have a picnic together, and after a few movements discover a position to suit them. This one likes the sun in his face, that one must have a view, another finds a rock to lean his back upon. That sounds like such a delightful village. There are more quotations, but maybe I'll save some for my blog post wrap up. And then I have two mysteries that I have been reading. One of them is Airs Above Ground by Mary Stewart. This is our Bookish Kingdom book club pick for the month of May. This has such a vivid setting because it involves the Spanish riding school and the white Lipizan stallions of Vienna. So the main character travels to Austria on a last-minute errand of the heart, taking with her young Timothy Lacey, who has his own problems to solve. But the personal becomes political when the pair find themselves entangled in a plot involving the colorful members of a traveling circus and the famous Lipizan stallions of Vienna. The Spanish riding school, these stallions can sort of dance, as it were, and some of their movements are called airs above the ground. The way she describes it is just so beautiful. Vanessa is actually a vet, and Timothy Lacey loves horses and actually wants to work at this Spanish riding school. And it's just fun to see both of their love of horses. And the traveling circus in Vienna is beautiful. Traveling to these villages in Austria, and then they go and stay at an Austrian castle. And then there's quite a thrilling chase, which I read Mary Stewart before, so I was prepared for that. I think her books, like especially the first half, it's almost like, you know, like the other books I was talking about, Elizabeth Cadell, D. Stevenson, like it's just kind of charming and like slow paced, cozy and interesting. And like there's a little bit of suspense from the building mystery. But yeah, then it often does break out into this action and like high suspense. I bought the paperback without realizing that my mom had already purchased the ebook. And she often will put a little note at the beginning with like her sort of quick review of a book. And her quick review of this one, pleasing until the unbridled crazy action sequences at the end. So if you're not into action sequences, don't let them take you by surprise. I bought this book because I was trying to get the free shipping on Thrift Books, and I'd heard good things about the Grantchester Mysteries. Sidney Chambers and the Shadow of Death is, I believe, the first in the series. This is by James Runcie. It's about a vicar in, I think, like the 1950s. It takes place after World War II, and he ends up getting involved in these mysteries and solving these mysteries. I think I'd seen some of the show. I'd heard that the show kind of went off in different directions and that the book was better. I guess I haven't actually finished this. I'm only a third or half of the way through. It hasn't really grabbed me so far. I guess the fact that he's a vicar, I would have hoped that like his faith would be more important to him. Like in the Father Brown mysteries, that's G.K. Chesterton. I haven't actually read those in a little while, but I feel like you can see Father Brown's faith in God, and it's not necessarily like super in your face, but it's there and you can really see it and feel it. I can't really see it in this one. He does mention things about the church and things about his job, but it kind of seems like it's just a job to him. He's almost a little bit apathetic, and I'm wondering if maybe later on in the book, like we'll find out why he seems kind of apathetic, like maybe he'll come out of his shell. But at the moment, I feel like Anne Elliot, the way she feels about Mr. Elliot in Persuasion, she says that she feels like she doesn't know him, and that like there's never any burst of feeling or of warmth or delight, and I guess I feel that way about this book. I feel like Sidney Chambers is just coming off kind of flat. So yeah, I'm gonna finish it and save my judgment until I finish it, but it's not grabbing me right out of the gate. One last book to tell you about is The Sherwood Ring by Elizabeth Marie Pope. This is one of my favorite books, and I feel like every time I reread it way too quickly because I just can't put it down. I'm like looking forward to my favorite scenes and I just love it so much. It's such a great setup. It takes place at this beautiful historic house in New England called Thankful Rest. And the house was built in like the 1600s or 1700s and was quite significant in the Revolutionary War. And we really get to see everything that took place in the countryside and at this house during the Revolutionary War. Newly orphaned Peggy Graham is caught off guard when she first arrives at her family's ancestral estate. Her eccentric uncle Enos drives away her only new acquaintance, Pat, a handsome British scholar, then leaves Peggy to fend for herself. But she is not alone. The house is full of mysteries and ghosts. Soon Peggy becomes involved with spirits of her own colonial ancestors and witnesses the unfolding of a centuries-old romance against a backdrop of spies and intrigue and of battles plotted and foiled. History has never been so exciting, especially because the ghosts are leading Peggy to a romance of her own. As the back of the cover indicates, there's romance, there's mystery, there's history. The Revolutionary War setting is just so vivid. Like you can tell this is written by a historian and a scholar. I read Elizabeth Marie Pope's book about Milton earlier this year, and that's a very scholarly book about Paradise Regained. I thought it was fascinating, and it made me wonder when I was rereading this. Peggy, the main character, is in the library at one point, reading a book that was written in the 1600s, and I need to look up and see if this book is real, because knowing that the author is familiar with Renaissance scholarship, because she wrote this book about Milton, it made me wonder if let's see, this book published in London in 1616, a treatise of apparitions and spirits walking the earth by that learned and excellent minister of the gospel, Dr. Abraham Potter. I just feel so suspicious. Like, is this an actual treatise or is it based on something that Elizabeth Marie Pope actually came across? Here's the excerpt that Peggy reads. There be some scholars, and among them men eminent for their wisdom and holiness, who maintain that there are yet another sort of spirits who may return to the earth, and these not to uncover secret murder, nor yet to reveal hidden treasure, nor yet for any purpose hitherto set down, but rather out of pure charity to give what help and comfort they may to such of their descendants who continue to dwell in the same house. And I almost wonder, like, did she read that and that sparked this entire idea for a book? Because it's just so sweet, and they are such unique sort of ghosts. Even on the back, when they mention ghosts, I feel like that sets you up with a wrong impression of the story, because they're definitely not your typical apparitions. It's such a wonderful book, and I'm very much looking forward to discussing this at our bookish picnic. Kate Howe and I are doing a little in-person subscriber meetup, and of course, if we're doing a meetup, we have to have a book to discuss, and this should be perfect for the setting. I'm hoping to film a vlog of our picnic, so stay tuned. That should be up very soon. I hope you guys enjoyed today's reading wrap-up. I'd love to hear about what you've been reading down in the comments. I need to get myself organized. I feel like this month I drifted a little bit to many lovely books, but I didn't like kind of settle down to, you know, Attacking Anna Karenina. That's on my list. So I'm gonna make myself a little bit more of a plan. If you want to hear more about these books, I am planning to do a little reading wrap up over on my blog on Substack, bookishprincess.substack.com. So definitely go check that out. I hope your April was a wonderful month and a wonderful reading month, and I'll talk to you guys again soon. Bye.